Several news outlets are now claiming the Supreme Court has just greenlit racial profiling for authorities searching for illegal aliens. But is this really the case? We'll have a look at the actual ruling and what it says. Also, the dead internet theory may no longer be just a theory. Google has now declared that the so-called open internet is rapidly coming to an end. And in other news, the FBI is now launching its own investigation into the stabbing death of a Ukrainian refugee on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina, which has sparked national outrage. I'll be talking about these topics and a lot more today. I'm the Epoch Times senior investigative reporter Joshua Phillip, and you're listening to Crossroads. Welcome to Crossroads. First off, on the allegations, the Supreme Court just gave the go-ahead for immigration authorities to use racial profiling. If you were to read a lot of the mainstream media right now, the big narrative going around is this: they just allowed for racial profiling. Is that what really happened? Well, the actual case on this is Noem versus Vasquez-Perdomo, right? Noem v. Vasquez-Perdomo. And the decision on it was issued on September 8th. This is what it actually does. It temporarily lifts restrictions on immigration officers to stop people if they believe they might be an illegal alien. Kind of like stop and frisk, but you're being stopped because they might believe you're not a U.S. citizen. It's kind of racial profile. I'll get into it. Now, of course, that's the challenge with deporting people. This is why it's hard. How do you tell if someone is an American citizen or if they're an illegal alien? How does, immigration authorities look to carry this out? How could they possibly do it? Well, usually you need to ask. You need to go up there and say, show me your proof that you're an American citizen. You don't look American enough. Now, the challenge in the United States is that for a long time, officers have not been allowed to question people's legal status. They used to be allowed to do it. That used to be the way it happened. They used to be able to stop people, say, you know what, nobody here speaks English. They don't look like they're from here. And they could ask them, show me proof of citizenship, show me something. And if they couldn't, they might take them in, temporarily for questioning. Now, even at the state level, when people apply for welfare or government programs these days, in many cases, authorities are not allowed to ask people whether or not they're U.S. citizens. And that has created a lot of additional problems. The protections put in place to prevent deportations are to an extent actually that criminals are being let off the hook, and people who are normally not eligible for things like free health care and free housing and free, everything else, they're able to get it. Because the authorities tasked with deciding who's eligible or not are not allowed to ask, are you an American citizen? And so when it comes to deportations, the only way that officers can actually deport people, the only way, at least until now, that they could say, okay, this person is in fact an illegal alien and we need to send them away, is if they commit crimes. Basically, for many years now, the only types of illegal aliens who could be deported are if you catch them while they're illegally crossing, or if they commit a crime and then the police hand them to border agents. If that happens, they go in, they get booked, the police find the person is there in the United States illegally, and for a long time, they hand them off to deportation authorities and they deport them. That is how it used to happen in the U.S. When they, kind of the second tier, when police and other authorities were not allowed to ask people. You had to wait till they committed crimes. Basically what this meant, though, it meant illegal aliens in the United States were basically safe from being deported as long as they did not commit secondary crimes. Because, of course, illegally entering the country is a crime. As long as you don't commit another one, for the most part, they were safe. But even that got overturned in many states and cities. That was, of course, by the sanctuary city policies and sanctuary state policies. What the sanctuary policies actually do is they restrict police or courts from cooperating with federal authorities on deportations. And so that process whereby someone commits a crime, they're here illegally, you hand them off to ICE, they were not allowed to do that. In fact, it's a misdemeanor crime if a police officer does that. If a police officer or anybody else who works for the government, alerts ICE of, let's say, a murderer or a rapist or a child sex abuser or a DUI guy who just killed somebody and they're here illegally, and these have, there's a lot of cases like that, they're not allowed to report them to ICE. They face a criminal charge if they do that. That is what the actual sanctuary city policies have done. So overall, what's been happening in the US is that effectively, illegal aliens have been shielded from deportations. Why is that? Well, because you can't ask them. You're not allowed to ask people, are you here illegally? You're not allowed to check it. You're not allowed to report it. The police are not even allowed to report it. And so if you remove the programs where you can't ask them, they don't tell you, you can't report them, you can't turn them in, nothing. What does immigration authorities actually stand for? Federal immigration authorities, because of many of these policies, the whole thing, they have not been able to do much unless they catch people while they're in the process of illegally entering the United States. Even that was largely overturned because of things like temporary protection status and other things which allowed people to enter the American heartland. And once they're in the heartland, basically there's nothing you can do. Even if they commit crimes, there's nothing you can do. Even if they violate their parole, even if they violate the standards of, having to show up for immigration court, even if they violate everything, there was nothing you could do. That is how things have been in the US for a very long time. But what's interesting now is that's changing. And this is where the new determination from the Supreme Court comes in. Now, it may seem it's not really permanent. This is kind of the caveat to it. It was delivered as a shadow docket. And what that means basically, it's an expedited process that does not have the full briefings or oral arguments from the Supreme Court. Also, importantly, what the Supreme Court just did on technically allowing racial profiling, it's not a final ruling. And so what that means, it's going to go back to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, for potential other changes. It's not a final decision by the Supreme Court, in other words. For now, though, what this does, it puts a temporary lift on restrictions that were stopping federal immigration authorities from searching for illegal aliens, mainly in Los Angeles. But because this is Supreme Court, it applies to the whole U.S. And so that's what's happening now. Technically, as we speak, immigration authorities are now allowed to ask people, are you here legally? Are you an illegal alien? Technically, though, it kind of does allow for racial profiling. And so on that front, the narratives, they're half true. They are partially true. This is how it actually works. This determination from the Supreme Court, it will allow ICE agents to stop people, to question people on the suspicion that they are illegal aliens. And that could include stops based on their appearance, they don't look American enough, based on what language they speak or their accent, they don't speak American, and even on what their occupation is. Maybe they work manual labor or they're staff in a restaurant or things like that. Jobs, of course, what that actually means is, of course, if, let's say, immigration authorities go to a location, they go there, they kick the doors down, a bunch of people make a run for it, they arrest all those people because they suspect they might be illegal aliens. Maybe half of them are illegal aliens, maybe a few of them are not, right? And so they can round them up if they bust a business and there are suspected illegal aliens at that business, and they can question them. It doesn't mean they're going to be deporting American citizens, but it does mean they can stop them and question them. Now, with that said, this will also possibly lead ICE to question some people who are in fact American citizens or who are here legally, right? It's not just like a citizenship. It could be you're here on a visa, maybe you're here on a student visa. They might question you because now they are legally allowed to do that. And so technically, yes and no. They are now allowed to do racial profiling. This is the other point to that. Like, there are illegal aliens from every country. If you have like a British illegal alien or like a French illegal alien, they're going to get deported too. So it's not like a skin color type thing. They are going to be looking for signs that people are here illegally. Now, like in other news, the internet as we know it is coming to a brutal end. It's no longer free, it's no longer open, and it's quickly going the opposite way, becoming less free and less open. In fact, Google has now openly acknowledged this to an extent. The Verge says this. It says, for months, Google has maintained that the web is thriving. AI is not tanking traffic. And search engines, well, they are not sending people, they're sending people to a wider variety of websites than ever before. But they're not. Turns out websites are becoming fewer and fewer because, well, search engines are sending people to fewer and fewer websites. People are just frequenting a few main ones, and a lot of other ones are invisible. But in a court filing that says last week, Google admitted that the open web is already in rapid decline. It says it was spotted earlier by Jason Kint and reported by the Search Engine Roundtable, by Search Engine Roundtable. Now it says this: Google submitted the filing ahead of another trial that will determine how it will address its monopoly on the advertising and technology business. It says the U.S. Department of Justice recommends that Google break up its advertising business, but the company argues in the filing that this is not ideal because it would only accelerate the decline of the open web. Quote, harming publishers who currently rely on open web display advertising revenue. Now, briefly, I'd say that's absolute nonsense because Google has had no problem destroying many online businesses that used to rely on their advertising revenue, but they denied them for ideological reasons. Google has been one of the main gatekeepers of censorship, deciding who can have a voice and who cannot. But further in it says this. This is Google in the documents. It says this, but the changes have been many. AI is reshaping ad tech at every level. Non-open web display ad formats like connected TV and retail media are exploding in popularity. And Google's competitors are directing their investments to these new growth areas. It says the fact is that today, the open web is already in rapid decline. And plaintiff's divestiture proposal would only accelerate that decline, harming publishers who currently rely on open web display advertising revenue. It says, as the law makes clear, the last thing a court should do is intervene to reshape an industry that is already in the midst of being reshaped by market forces. Now, the problem is, some of the companies that have this massive monopoly over the flow of information on the internet, they have also decided that they should themselves be taking up this power to become the gatekeepers of information and the people who decide who gets money and who doesn't. Google, notably, has a massive monopoly over the entire news industry, at least online. Why is that? It's because Google's search ranking can make or break a website. They decide who gets traffic and who does not. Google makes that decision. Who at Google? Who is it that has allowed this power? Google ad revenue can decide who gets money and who does not. What businesses can actually function on the internet, which ones cannot, because they have a monopoly on advertising on the internet. And Google's control of YouTube also gives Google the same type of monopolistic control over video, including on traffic and on revenue. They decide who gets traffic, who does not. They decide who gets money, who does not. And look, full disclosure, I'm an aggrieved party on this because Google has demonetized me for years. All right, just being clear. But case in point, if you believe I should not be demonetized by YouTube, case in point, they don't like what I have to say, and so that's why they're doing it, right? Now, it's also the case the whole internet is being shaken up by new technology. So this isn't just a Google thing. There's a lot of other things at play. There's artificial intelligence, and that's a big one. And AI is about to also massively disrupting because basically you have it so that like random third world countries can now create massive amounts of online content on par with major American businesses and challenge them on the open internet. You have like AI podcasting companies saying they want to create literally thousands of AI manufactured, AI slop, I'd call it, AI manufactured podcasts, and they want to flood all the podcast systems with these. And so while you have normal content creators thinking for themselves and creating content, they're going to be competing with like third world chop shops, slapping together, AI-driven podcasts, where you have, of course, maybe one channel competing now with 1,000 channels run by bots. That's happening now as well. There's also the problem where people are using artificial intelligence to create patents, and they're registering the patents so that they own different types of intellectual property. And they're also using AI to like detect people violating their patents, and they're suing everybody. Artificial intelligence is rapidly making the internet unusable. It's very quickly going in that direction because it's flooding it with so much garbage content and flooding it with so much like fake content too. This is becoming a big problem as well when it comes to like search engines and who gets revenue and who doesn't. Also, these are new challenges actually to the open internet, and how open do we want it to be? Do we want that? I don't know. Already, as we're speaking, foreign governments are also fining different websites. They're censoring online news. They're censoring Americans. They're issuing controls over content on the internet. You're not allowed to say that. Yes, you're in America, but the internet is open and available here. Therefore, you need to follow our rules even though you're not in our country. You have a globalized legal system taking place because of the openness of the internet. And on the point of Google, they've also engaged in many, many forms of what I regard as censorship. I really believe a lot of this is also deeply politically motivated. And I'd say that you can provably say this because if you look at who they censor and who they do not, there does appear to be, at least in my opinion, a very heavy partisan bias. And what that's doing is, it means artificial intelligence is being trained with available information. AI is being trained with a partisan bias based upon what people decide should be shown and what shouldn't. People are being judged with a partisan bias. Can you run a business on the internet or should you not? Search engines are being run with a partisan bias. Censorship is being run with a partisan bias. International fines are being run with a partisan bias. What does that mean? It means there's a manufactured fake echo chamber that's being created. And this fake echo chamber is working as kind of the brain, centrifuge for this new AI technology. It's being integrated into everything. This is the actual state of the internet right now as we speak. Now, look, in my opinion, the death of the open internet is actually being caused by censorship. If we think back to the early 2000s and what the internet was, it seemed like this great open place where you could kind of say what you want, you could build businesses, you could connect with people all around the world, and it was frankly kind of great up until about 2015, 2016. What happened 2015, 2016? Well, Donald Trump got elected. The media at the time were saying he was polling at like 2% or 3% victory chance. They thought he had no chance on earth to win. When he did win, and Time Magazine had to reprint rapidly a new cover because they believed Hillary Clinton was absolutely in the door, a lot of media very briefly did some soul searching. They said, how did we get things so wrong? They were saying, are we disconnected from the American public? Do we not actually understand people? And then, of course, he had similar movements taking place globally. Suddenly, there was what they call populist movement spreading around the world. And that freaked out the powers that be. A lot of the media establishment very quickly went from saying, we did something wrong, we don't understand the world's people, to then saying, it is not us, it is you. And they blamed all of this on the free access of information. They said all of this was caused by foreign disinformation. Russia disinformation. Russia's trying to rig our elections with fake information. It turns out they were the ones lying about that, by the way. The media industry, they were the ones spreading the disinformation. They lied to the world using that fake narrative. But that fake narrative was then used for a massive wave of censorship. YouTubers were taken offline if their views veered off from the establishment narrative. Websites were taken offline. If you were on Reddit or Facebook and you had a group, you were taken offline. Twitter, influencers were taken offline. Any kind of voice that did not march in lockstep with this new, ideological regime was erased from the internet, denied revenue, denied traffic, and denied the ability to have a business on the internet. And after they went after all the influencers, they began going after the normal users of the internet. What then happened? Average people had journalists showing up their doors saying, "Do you know you spread fake information? Are you aware that you spread dangerous memes? Oi, mate, do you have a license for that meme? Do you have a license for that protected speech?" Globally, this happened. And what happened then is that people realized it was too dangerous to express their views on the internet if their views diverged from the established narrative. And what then happened? It became very difficult to run a business on the internet. Anybody who dared have a viewpoint, anybody who dared say something that was not allowed to be said, anybody who dared question anything, especially leading up to like COVID and the Wuhan, laboratory and the whole 9 yards with that, anybody who dared speak the truth, which we now know was the case, was attacked. And a lot of news agencies found themselves federally investigated, raided, questioned, censored, attacked. Journalists have their livelihoods put at stake. Some people even had their basic freedoms eliminated. In fact, Epoch Times, still we have ongoing criminal investigations alongside many other conservative influencers. A lot of innocent people, I believe, have been targeted because of this biased, what was a biased justice system. Targeting people, investigating people, again, because we were saying things that they didn't want being said. That is what killed the open internet. The internet right now is dying. The internet right now, if you go on websites that used to have, people flooding it, people were commenting, you now find a smaller and smaller number of voices willing to speak their minds. You now find fewer and fewer people willing to post. And what that means is, of course, fewer and fewer viewpoints are allowed to be made. You now have a consolidation, really a centralization of information, news silos being raised. And that once wonderful, free and open internet that we knew from the early 2000s, it's come to a very sad end. I do believe this can change if censorship goes away for the most part. I do believe this can change if the hit piece journalism being run by most of the legacy news outlets changes, where they were even targeting people, anybody who dared speak about anything they didn't agree with. All of this has scared people into a tiny corner, and we'll see if it stays that way, because I personally believe it's already flipping. The opposite is now happening, where people no longer care. You can call people names now. You can say that what you say is offensive, and they'll say, "I don't care." That's where we're at right now. Now, on that front, we'll also see what happens with artificial intelligence, because what this also means is that human creativity is not a lucrative business, at least not on the internet. Anybody now can fake AI write a book. Anybody now can fake AI generate images, generate music, soon generate video. Anybody can generate creative content on the cheap at the whim of just a few words you type. And what they've done is they've made human creativity a cheap commodity that is flooding the internet. Now, at some point, we're going to have to see what people value in terms of content. Do they want that, or do they want real, valuable, just normal people? Do they want real people, or do they want AI driven by who knows who? And of course, we're also going to end up with probably a need to rein that in as well at some point. How do you weigh it? How do you monetize it? Do people value, again, the endless flow of just auto-generated content? Or do you want something unique? That is going to be the big question. Now, speaking of viral news and stuff going on the internet, this incident happening with this young Ukrainian refugee in the United States being murdered on a train, I have never seen outrage like this. People are furious. This case is not going away. It's interesting, actually. This is very quickly becoming the equivalent of the George Floyd for the right. And George Floyd on the right of an actual innocent person, not a career criminal, not somebody who was overdosing on fentanyl, not somebody who just tried to, buy stuff at a store using a counterfeit bill, not somebody who was known by the police for years. An innocent young girl walking into a train, pulling out her phone, looking at it, and then being brutally stabbed to death for no reason, and then looking up at her killer in fear and terror in her eyes as she fell to the ground and died while other people sat there and literally filmed her. The FBI is now launching its own investigation into what happened. This is the stabbing death of this Ukrainian refugee, this very sad story, on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina that is sparking just absolute outrage. I've never seen outrage like this. FBI Director Kash Patel wrote in a brief statement on this on X. He said this, he said, "The FBI has been investigating the Charlotte train murder from day one. Stay tuned." Now, he's not detailing too much on the findings of the investigation because it just happened and they're still investigating it. President Donald Trump, though, he also issued his own statements a couple times, actually. He's taken this very seriously. Trump says this horrible tragedy is the result of light on crime policies that have swept the United States. He wrote on Truth Social that, quote, "The perpetrator was a well-known career criminal who had previously been arrested and released on cashless bail in January, a total of 14 times. Cashless bail. The guy should have been in jail. He was not. And when he should have been in jail, instead of being in jail, he murdered this young girl." Trump says, quote, "What the hell was he doing riding the train and walking the streets?" Trump says criminals like this need to be locked up. The blood of this innocent woman can literally be seen dripping from the killer's knife, and now her blood is on the hands of the Democrats who refuse to put bad people in jail. Now, Trump goes on to call out local officials for their light and crime policies for doing this. He called out the mainstream media also for being basically silent on it. On that point, some of the media have now come out, New York Times in particular, and caused even more outrage because rather than say, yeah, this is sad, yeah, we will treat this the same as we did with Daniel Penny and George Floyd and everything else, they're actually saying that this is somehow a race issue. They're saying that white people are guilty for all these, historical crimes going back to the 1800s. The New York Times article, uppercase is black and lowercase is white. People are disgusted by what they're seeing. That they're turning this again into this dang race narrative that everybody is sick of. Absolutely sick of it, because a lot of people believe that those race narratives allow for these light on crime policies that are allowing innocent people to be murdered like this in cold blood for no reason. Another terrible video going around. After stabbing this young girl to death, this man, again, the alleged killer, although there's a video of him doing it, but innocent until proven guilty, fair enough. The full video came out. It's horrifying. The man was then walking around the train, blood dripping from his hands, declaring, "I got that white girl." And of course, this raises the other question, was this a hate crime? Or does hate crime only go one way? Is a hate crime if the victim is white? Because again, a lot of this is race narrative. And that's unfortunately where we've been as a country for a long time. The media has been feeding these people's heads with hatred. They've been flooding people's brains with these hateful narratives that white people are historically evil, historically guilty. And if you believe they're guilty, what do you do to guilty people? Well, you punish them. They've made it so that every single person is guilty by the color of their skin. That's the way the media have framed this for more than a decade. Kids are being taught this in schools. Businesses are training people on it. There are DEI offices in government and corporations and police telling people this, re-educating people, forcing it into their heads. And what they're saying is historical guilt. And what do you do to guilty people? You punish them. This is the result of these disgusting, sick narratives that have been flooded into the American mind for the last decade. My personal hope is that we don't become what we've seen as evil. right? You gaze into the void, you hunt monsters, do you become a monster yourself? We've been flooded with race narratives. Do the race narratives stay in place only in the inversion, or do we discard them completely? That is the impasse the United States is now at. Now, President Donald Trump, for his part, he's saying that this is something else. He's saying this is really about these light on crime policies, that this is not a race issue. This is an issue of a very small minority of violent criminals who are terrorizing people regardless of skin color. This is a very small number of people, repeat criminals, 14, 13, 12, 11, repeat crimes, who are allowed over and over again to be out on the streets, and they're killing people and robbing people and raping people. This is being caused, he said, not because of the color of a person's skin, but because people who choose violence are allowed to do it. This is what Donald Trump said in a White House video.
For far too long, Americans have been forced to put up with Democrat-run cities that set loose savage, bloodthirsty criminals to prey on innocent people. Really very, very innocent people. In every place, they control radical left judges, politicians, and activists, and they've adopted a policy of catch and release for thugs and killers. In Charlotte, North Carolina, we saw the results of these policies when a 23-year-old woman who came here from Ukraine met her bloody end on a public train. And here's a picture of it. This is the picture of it. And this is a picture of the woman, a beautiful young girl that never had problems in life, with a magnificent future in this country. And now she's dead. She was slaughtered by a deranged monster who was roaming free after 14 prior arrests. We cannot allow a depraved criminal element of violent repeat offenders to continue spreading destruction and death throughout our country. We have to respond with force and strength. We have to be vicious just like they are. It's the only thing they understand. 24 of the top 25 most dangerous cities in America are run by Democrat mayors. 50 people were murdered in Chicago in recent weeks, with hundreds being shot. And it's time to stop this madness. The people of our country need to insist on protection, safety, law, and order. We have proven that it can be done because we did it right here in D.C., in District of Columbia. The capital of America was a bloodthirsty, horrible, dangerous place, one of the worst. And now it's a crime-free city, and we're going to keep it that way. It can be done. It can happen fast. All we want is, please, Mr. President, we need help. Chicago needs help. Other cities need help. We'll do what has to be done because we're going to make America safe again, and that includes our big cities. We're going to make those cities safe. Thank you.
The killing of the Ukrainian woman, it's also bringing back debates on narratives over Black Lives Matter. The entire race movement that swept the entire country, burned down buildings, murdered a lot of innocent people, robbed stores, and allowed for what is really a reform of the entire policing system in the United States. The question being raised now, with all these narratives, this entire hate narrative being flooded into magazines and late night TV and just about every talk show, the narratives that spread from New York Times with its fake 1619 project that its own fact checker said was fake, and they published it anyways. And then the former, of course, Obama administration even implemented it into Common Core education, forcing your kids to learn fake history. Again, New York Times was one of the main bodies behind that fake history, the 1619 project. This re-education of America to view everything through the lens of race, and notably on a fake narrative. This led to reforms on police. And there's a big question now. Were those police reforms that sparked this whole movement, really the big, kind of undercurrent of it, did these police reforms cause more problems, or did they fix problems? Did it make America more safe or less safe? Is it preventing deaths, or is it causing deaths? It's also causing people to look at all the journalists and all the officials who made national spectacles over a very small handful of cases. Say his name. Who was this person? Say his name, and so on, right? Remember those narratives? Painting streets in Washington, D.C. with these narratives, murals going up everywhere. You were bombarded with these narratives. Everybody had to see it. But interestingly, what's happening now, all the people talking about those abuses, all those people saying this was morally wrong, almost all of those voices, journalists, public officials were making a big deal about it, are almost completely silent on this killing. Some are even dismissive, some are celebrating it. And the question is, are they doing that because the victim is white? In other words, are they themselves actually racist? Were they racists this entire time, but they were preaching to us anti-racism as a form of their own discrimination? This is raising a debate really on whether the entire thing, this entire decade of race narratives, was nothing more than a show of racial discrimination in disguise of a movement that claimed to be the opposite. A movement of hatred under the guise of anti-hatred. A movement of utter racial abuse under the narrative of preventing racial abuse. A movement of just nothing more than racial agitation brainwashing disguised as, normal, just informing the public. Is that what it was? Well, that's a real question being raised right now. And something also, I think, that resulted in crime reforms that are now costing innocent people their lives. Was this all fake? And is this causing more harm to the United States than good? Again, I think what's happening now, there will likely be a campaign to roll back many of those police reforms. There's going to be a campaign, a movement to roll back some of those narratives. The entire narrative the world has been brainwashed on for the last 10 years is now falling apart. I think there are two different paths, though, the world can go down. Do we throw the ring into the fire or do we keep it, frankly? My hope is that people don't keep it under a different form. My hope is that people don't let themselves become hateful in the face of hatred. My hope is that we regardless as it is, as the president is saying, this is the result of DEI policies, this is the result of these light on crime policies, not a result of just race, fighting and so on, not a result of infighting that will tear this country apart. I personally hope we don't go down that route. I do think those narratives need to be torn down. I think the narratives need to be exposed, but we need to do it properly. I think really that Americans, we do need to get along with each other if we're going to have a country. And I do hope that as, again, these narratives fall apart, I do hope that as we, hopefully reform our criminal justice system, that people don't become the monsters that they once opposed. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into it. Real quick also, I'm going to be speaking at 2 events in California. So if you're in San Diego or LA or Orange County or like Arizona, you want to drive over, or anywhere else for that matter, I'm going to be speaking at 2 different events. One of them is going to be in San Diego. Now that's going to be on September 24th on Wednesday. The other one's going to be in Orange County. That's Thursday, September 25th. So if you're in California, Southern California, not next week, but the week after, come and hang out. That'll be Wednesday and Thursday. If you want to find the website for that, it's epochsd.com, epochsd.com. And if you want to bring a friend, I think they're still offering, they have a deal on there. You can bring your friend for free. This is partly a fundraiser. It's not that much. It's more just to hang out. I'm going to be speaking there. We'll do a live Q&A also. Again, the website for that, epochsd.com. Wednesday, September 24th in San Diego, Thursday, September 25th in Orange County. So, yeah, come on out, folks. Be great seeing y'all. That said, let's jump into some questions. First off, TZ Burton. You're saying the 1964 Civil Rights Law is excellent, but it has a fatal flaw. It's a circle and nothing can be done because everyone is protected for all reasons, so not to discriminate against anyone. Yeah, it's a hard issue, right? It's a hard issue because let's put it this way. I'd like to say that I'm going to take the third route. I'm going to say something that probably not a lot of people are saying. I don't get offended. I think the solution to racism is to not be so dang sensitive about it. I think that in the 90s, when you had guys like Dave Chappelle making jokes about race and we could all laugh about it and people weren't so offended by everything, I think that was a better state. I think that when we can tease each other and get along still, it's better. I think there was a racial blindness we used to have that was better. I think people have become so completely sensitive to everything with race that it's like we're all walking on glass these days, And I'm not blind to the bigger problems that existed earlier. I do know that, of course, if you go back to Jim Crow and everyone else talk about it, yeah, there were problems. I would actually say, though, that if you can't really accuse one group of abusing another. If you want to go back in history, you can see everybody abused everybody. Everybody abused everybody at some point. People wrong each other all the time. I believe that there's even a cycle of abuse. Oftentimes, one person abuses the other. Eventually, that other person is going to abuse them right back. Wars, tribal wars, blood feuds, racial, battles. These things always go back and forth until one side decides to forgive the other. And I think that was also part of the big experiment we had with BLM. The question for a lot of people was, look, okay, white people are willing to say, maybe we were wrong. Okay, fine. We'll let you have your narrative, right? But the opposite happened. The media has been feeding hatred. They push it to the other side where they're saying white people are historically guilty. White people are to blame for this. You had clips of CNN having guys on, even now, even after this killing, blaming white people for everything. People are like, what are you talking? How are you making this a race issue? What's wrong with you? What is morally wrong with you that you're so hateful that this is all you think about? It bothers me, right? Now, on that point, look, I've been racially discriminated against. I kind of get the opposite, actually. I'm kind of like a racial capybara. I can go and drink from the water and the crocodiles come and lay next to me and take me in as one of them. I'm in a weird racial. Okay, let me tell you something kind of funny. I'm in a weird racial place. People tend to think I am what they are. If I'm hanging out with Brazilians, they think I'm Brazilian. If I'm hanging out with Italians, they think I'm Italian. If I'm in a place and there's Iranians nearby, they all think I'm Iranian. Funny story, when I was in the Darien Gap and I was going to these migrant camps, there was this big Iranian guy. He looked like he was Iranian military. And he was telling me, I know you're Iranian. I know you're Iranian. I was I'm not Iranian, I swear. I kind of Jewish people, they tend to think I'm Jewish. You know what I mean? White people tend to think I'm white. Black people do not think I'm black. That's the one I don't get. Asians tend to not think I'm Asian either. But for a lot of races, I tend to kind of be in the inner circle. It's kind of funny. It's a very funny place to be. And so I kind of get reverse racism where everybody racially identifies me, but I get along with all of them. And I just kind of own it. I just don't tell them, right? I'm like, yes, brother, we are one, yes. But, my brother kind of gets the opposite. He looks more like my dad. And so, I know growing up, he used to have to fight all the time. He used to, I grew up all over the place. One of the places we lived was in Santee, California. You actually have the KKK out there. And my brother used to get bullied pretty badly by some of these white supremacist groups. He used to literally have to fight every single day. I didn't have to deal with that. He did. Fist fight, real fight, almost every single day. And so I know there are people who deal with that. Yeah, Troy and Emmy are saying, Josh, I thought you had some Asian in the mix. I'm super mixed race. My great-grandpa on my dad's side was Filipino, but they were like they were U.S. military Filipino, like super patriot American. And then my great-grandma on my dad's side was Native Hawaiian. On my mom's side, my family goes back to the Mayflower, but if you want to like break down racially, I'm mostly like Swedish, German, and you from the UK, like British Isles. Like I'm like 75% that, and then like random little stuff thrown in there. You know what I mean? If you want to really break it down, I don't really care that much about race. I value culture, but I don't care that much about race. I'm a mutt. All right, I'm the dog at the pound that nobody would adopt. That's me. Okay, and I don't really care that much. But anyways, back to what I'm saying. I don't think people need to make such a big deal about race. And I think actually this is where I disagree with the way the narratives are going. I do think that we have really been, should I say it? We've really been thrown under the bus with these narratives. I think we've really been brainwashed by these narratives. I think it's just terrible. We've been forced down our throats hateful narratives telling us that we should be against each other. If you were to ask me, look, I don't see the race narratives in America as being any different than the agitation propaganda narratives in any communist country. Whereas, for example, in like Soviet Russia, they were saying the kulaks, the evil kulaks are the ones to blame, the wealthy peasants, right? They're the cause of all your problems. The kulaks are behind this. In Cambodia, it's the educated people, the city dwellers, the people with glasses. They're the ones to blame for all your problems in life. They're the ones to blame. In China, the Chinese Communist Party, it's the landlords. The landlords are the ones to blame. They're the ones who caused all your problems. In Nazi Germany, right? They said it was the Jews who were to blame for everything. And they framed a lot of their, political narratives around it. And what is always the narrative? There's a group of people who are causing all of your problems. Elect me to office and I will destroy them for you because I'm your savior. I'm your government savior. And that's how communism comes into power. Let's put it this way. So in the United States, the race narratives, they're based on, it's critical theory, right? So critical theory critical race theory, critical gender theory, they have all kinds of them, right? Critical theory came from the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School is the school of Marxist studies. The Frankfurt School was a communist system. And what they did was this. They realized that, socioeconomics of Marxism did not apply so much to Americans. Marxism wasn't resonating as much with Americans because it was mostly about class struggle. Americans, we have a very fluid class system. Like you can be born rich and become poor. You can be born poor and become rich, right? That's America. We're not like 1800s Europe, or even these days in some parts, where your social connections kind of decide, you're kind of born into wealth or poverty. A lot of countries are like that. In America, we're not like that. So the socioeconomic narratives of Marxism were not really resonating with Americans. So what did they do? They went back to the drawing board and they came up with a new narrative made for Americans. That narrative was critical theory. And so what did they do? Rather than say the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, they said the whites and the blacks. Rather than the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, they said the men and the women. Or the transgenders, or the LGBTQ plus, whatever. I'm not saying like all homosexuals are part of that. I'm just saying that they used that, right? They call it the homosexual agenda, right? That's the actual political name they use for it. They framed these narratives. And so what did they do? rather than say we need to overthrow the bourgeoisie, we need to kill the kulaks, we need to kill the city dwellers, we need to kill the landlords, they said we need to destroy the white people because they have an unfair socioeconomic hold on wealth. It was the exact same narrative. It's in my eyes, it is the exact same thing. Exactly. It is the same narrative, but different people. It's a cookie cutter, right? And the cookie cutter picks out a little cookie in whatever society it's in. They manufactured divisions among Americans for that narrative. They did it for that narrative. And, it's true that communism, they always latch on to some real examples of historical wrongdoing, but what they do is they try to accelerate it. They try to grow it. They try to expand it, and then they mix in false information with true information. So when you criticize the false information, they bring up the true information and try to shut you down. That's what they do. It's about pushing things to an extreme, right? They take maybe you're a little mad at your landlord. Maybe you missed rent and he wants to kick you out. And so in China, they'd say, well, time to kill your landlord. Yeah, that's kind of extreme, right? In Russia, maybe your wealthy peasant neighbor was, not very nice to you, and you had a legitimate unhappiness with him. But the solution was not kill the kulak, as the Soviets, their narrative was. They try to push it to an extreme. Yes, in America, yes, there is historical wrongdoing on race. Yes, yeah, totally there was. But the solution is not to divide us as a nation and hate each other. I don't think that's good. I think that's terrible, right? I don't think that's the solution. And so, but that is the solution that these extremists have put before us. Now, the problem with communism is that it goes both ways. It actually, if you go into it, it's based in Hegelianism, and it's based in a social Darwinist theory. They call it the struggle of opposites. They have two narratives. They say that the conflict leads forward, and they say the struggle of opposites. What they want is two extremes fighting with each other. And they believe that agitation and social discord is what drives forward social evolution, survival of the fittest, social Darwinism applied to politics. That's what it is. And so when they talk about these things, it's not really that they want the bourgeoisie to kill the proletariats. They want the bourgeoisie to radicalize against the proletariats, kill some of them, and then the proletariats to turn around and kill them right back. They want the landlords and the rightists in China to begin fighting back. They want the white army to make the left-wing guys march around a tree with their guts nailed to the tree so they pull their guts out as they walk, which happened, by the way, because they want two extremes fighting each other. The real narrative of communism is dialectical materialism, the struggle of opposites. They want two sides fighting with each other, incapable of harmony. That is what it actually is. And so when I look at these things, that's what I see. When I look at Black Lives Matter, I agree, there are some historical wrongdoings, but I don't think that justifies the movement, nor do I think that's what it was actually about. I saw an agitation propaganda operation running on dialectical theory, dialectical materialist theory. What I saw them doing was using critical race theory as a political agenda and creating a social movement around it. My concern is it goes both ways. People are justified in being outraged right now. They are. I think they have been for a very long time. I don't think the killing of this young Ukrainian woman is the sole cause of it. I think what you're seeing right now is a bursting out of people people being angry for a very long time. It's reached the boiling point, and they're not holding it in anymore. Everybody has walked down the street and had crazy people act like that guy on the train. Not stabbing people, but acting like it. I had a colleague, an Asian colleague, stabbed in the neck with a broken bottle by some crazy guy in the subway like that. Very similar type. My wife was threatened twice by people like that with my daughter in New York. Really crazy people. Actually, one time, a very nice man walked up, I wasn't there because they were riding the subway alone, took my wife and daughter and said, let's go to the next train car, because this guy was like, I'll fight you, like acting like that guy on the train. And so, Americans, we've dealt with this. We've all encountered, maybe not experienced murder, of course, but we've seen people like that. And so it's reached a point where it's familiar enough, it's in our faces enough, and we've been frankly agitated enough for it that it's boiling to the surface. My concern is that we will become what we regard as evil. I think that's what we need to be cautious of at this time. You need to not become a commie, okay? Don't become a commie. Don't engage in the critical race theory just on the opposite side. I think there is need to be somewhat, outspoken, because I see it in two ways. I don't think people should be silent. I think that these narratives need to be torn down. And I think that right now it can do it. The momentum right now, the outcrying can actually tear down this entire narrative that has been forced upon us for the last decade plus. Agitation, propaganda, and race-based narratives based on dialectical theory, based on dialectical materialism, right? And Hegelian conflict leads forward. But you can very easily go too far with it. I think people need to be cautious of that line. I do believe that what President Trump is doing in terms of how he's framing this should be the way that the American people follow it, which is, you don't blame every black person, okay? I'm just gonna say it. You don't have to blame, it's not like every black person acts like that. And I know if you read X right now, you'll see a lot of people talking about it like that's the case. It's not don't make it a race issue is what I'm saying. Yeah, they've been agitated because the media has been feeding that for a long time, but it's not everybody. If you look at crime stats, they're being victimized by these crazy people too. The real cause of this is usually people who've been arrested 11 to 14 times or more, and they keep getting released back on the streets because of these light on crime policies. These light on crime policies have allowed people who are deeply mentally ill to be roaming the streets when they should not, and they're killing people. You have criminals who've been allowed to do this, and alongside these horrible things of violence and wrongdoing, there's no justice. And, it's terrible. I think we should acknowledge it's terrible. But I think we run the risk of becoming what we view as evil. It's a fine line. There is justification to be angry, right? There is. But you always have to know where the line is on, you can't become what you know is wrong, is I guess what I'm saying. And so there has to be a line with it somewhere. Another question, Seymour Butts, you said, remember in Goldfinger when James Bond destroyed the computer by asking why? That you're saying that these narratives can destroy the computer of the radical agitation propaganda system. I think it's true. I think actually it was interesting watching the New York Times come out and try to bring back the whole DEI narrative. They were like, well, white people, in 1800 and so got very angry and abused people. I'm not even joking, right? That was their narrative. That was their narrative. And people are furious. They're tearing it to pieces. They're furious. How dare you try to bring out your stupid narratives again on race? We are done with it. And people are very rightly asking, okay, look, you can say this was wrong, but how do you not say this is wrong? Obviously, you guys only care about race. And you're judging good or evil not based on action, but based on race, while trying to preach to us about racism. Forget all of you. I'm sick of it. You're asking why. I think that, again, you're watching the narratives crumble right now. Another topic, realityisreal.com, you're saying artificial intelligence equals artificial reality, which is impossible to actually exist. No matter how you try, you can't escape reality. Reality will always catch up to itself. It's better to face reality, be honest, and work hard. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree. I'm not a fan of AI. In fact, I really don't like AI. The only thing I'll use AI for is a replacement for like search engines because, let's put it this way, a lot of what I want to find, Google will not tell me, all right? A lot of search engines are they're too stacked in terms of how they rank media, and frankly, I think a lot of media is fake. I think a lot of them lie through their teeth. I think they've lost all integrity, and I don't think they're honest. And so I will use Grok, if you want to ask me, I will use Grok as a replacement for Google. That's the extent of how I use AI. Okay, I admit I also briefly used AI to play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm kind of a nerd, okay? Face mask reveal. I'm a bit of a nerd. I did that for a little bit, I admit it. But I haven't used AI for anything else, okay? I don't like AI. I don't like the idea of artificial intelligence. I don't like the idea of something trying to tell me what's real or not. I don't like the idea of fake human interaction, not one bit. I don't like the idea of replacing human interaction with robots. I dislike it. I dislike everything about it. I think if it went away tomorrow, the world would be a better place. And I do fear, as realityisreal.com is saying, right? I do believe that, it's a scary thing when people enter a false reality and then take it as real. I think on a religious level, didn't the Bible warn people about that? Those who take falsehoods as truth, right? And I think the scary thing is, James, you played D&D too? Okay, sorry, I'm on two topics right now. With AI, the real scary thing is I think mental illness is oftentimes caused by people who take false reality as truth. People who become lost in an illusion, a mental illusion that they believe is reality. That's a scary place to be in. I'd actually say that the media has caused people to become clinically insane because they present, not all media, but at the establishment media, they present a false reality, and they have people living in a false reality. And what happens when people are living in a false reality, they present them with the truth, they'll try to destroy you. They get offended by reality. When you, let's give a movie reference. In The Matrix, right? Morpheus warns Neo that some people are not ready to break from the Matrix, and they will fight to defend it. You see people like that. You tell them the truth, they will attack you. But what is the solution to that? I believe the solution is to keep saying the truth. Take this from somebody who's been canceled in just about every way a person can be canceled. I've been attacked. I've been defamed. I've had hit pieces written against me. I've been threatened. All kinds of stuff. But I don't think you should ever stop speaking the truth. I don't think that it's not a way I want to live. I don't mean to sound crazy, but if I had to choose between dying or not being honest, I'd rather die. Like, I'm religious. Dying is not the biggest thing in the world for me. Like, it's not the end in my mind. It's inevitable. I have a very peaceful relationship with life and death, as a religious person. And I value my principles more than I value my physical life. That's me, right? And so if someone were to tell me, like, give up your beliefs or I'll kill you, I'd be like, well, show me to the guillotine, buddy. You know what I mean? Like, it's just how I am. And so I believe in maintaining your values and speaking the truth, regardless of what's in front of you. And I view this AI future as just being a false reality, the embodiment of a false reality. I don't like it at all. DC's B's, you're saying there's always been the hate. Modern society has just normalized it. Yeah. You know, it's true. There's a couple sides to it. Do you know what is oftentimes the most racist group of people? A mixed race group of friends will have the most racist banter, at least among men. I don't think it's that way among women. But if you have a group of friends and you have a white guy, an Asian guy, a black guy, and a Mexican guy, the banter between them will be some of those racist banter you've ever heard in your life. Because that's how men joke with each other. There's a way that we like to joke. I think it's okay to joke about our differences. And in a weird way, I think acknowledging our differences and cultural differences is not a bad thing. On the other side too, like, I think people get too offended by this stuff. You know, I do events sometimes, or not for a while, but sometimes with Larry Elder. And, you know, actually in Orange County, like I'm about to do an event on in a couple weeks. I've done events there with Larry Elder before, and he's talked about this. He says, you know, when he was a kid, so when he was a kid, he was made to memorize a poem, right? And, you know, being in school, he was made to memorize this poem. I'm telling Larry Elder's story here, right? He says that it's this poem they were taught in school where it's like, I can't remember the exact thing. Basically, I went on this nice little day trip, and then someone called me the N-word, and it ruined my day. And, you know, I went and had this wonderful time, and then someone called me the N-word, and it ruined my day. And he goes home and he tells his mom this poem, and his mom goes, well, ain't that a stupid reason to let someone ruin your day? Would you like some cookies? You know? You can't get too offended by this stuff. Like, I've had people call me racist names. I don't deal with a lot of it, but I have dealt with some. You know, it's like, it's not the end of the world. Like, you don't need to make the biggest deal about it. I think having a broad heart and a broad mind goes a very long way. And learning to be a little less offended will make your entire life a lot happier. All right, I know this is a philosophical day with y'all, but I'll give you some of my own life philosophy, all right? This is one of my life philosophies. I don't think being happy is about creating a world that makes you happy. I think being happy is about learning to not be affected by the wrongdoings of the world. I believe happiness is not about eliminating hardship. I believe happiness is about being happy despite hardship. I think that if you can be happy despite wrongdoing and despite all the wrongs of the world and despite racist language, and if you can be happy even if people mistreat you, nothing will move you. I think that is what true happiness is. I don't think it's when you try to eliminate all wrongdoing from the world. I think actually the real irony is that people who try to eliminate wrongdoing from the world often become the forces of evil in the world. That is historically always the case. Those who externally try to eliminate evil become the forces of evil. Those who try to internally eliminate the forces of evil, what do you call them? You call them saints. You call them prophets, right? I think most religions teach this. And if you were to ask me, that is part of what religion is for. I think that's part of what in my opinion, religious practice is. It's about internal refinement of facing the evils and the hardships of the world and not trying to change the outer world, but trying to change yourself. And through that, you can have a positive effect on the outer world. You become a force of good in a not good world, but you can make the world better by being a good example of it. I'm not trying to like preach to y'all about like my moral purity. Like I have plenty of shortcomings, all right? But this is part of my my own life belief. This is what I believe, all right? It's part of my understanding of religion, right? Last question, it's getting late. Pierre Brodeur, you're saying, that's what happens when you use a word too often in the wrong context. It makes for a lesser meaning. You know, that's a good point too. And I've been thinking about that as well. So you're talking, I think, about race. I think you're talking about racism, right? Or hate, I don't know. Let's put it this way. It used to be the case that if somebody called you a racist, it would destroy your reputation. If somebody called you a racist, you were like the scum of humanity, the worst in the world. You could be fired from your job or anything. They called so many people that name that it has lost its meaning. And I think we're living in a world right now of like post-shame. We're living in a post-shame world. People are no longer ashamed to be hit with labels like that. And that has its upsides and its downsides, right? On one side, you could say, great, who cares? Those narratives, good, let the narratives die because they're stupid. The other side is that people don't care anymore to do the thing that we used to culturally reject. And that's also not a good thing, I think. I think we've to an extent normalized some bad behaviors. And you know, it's again, I think there's oftentimes good sides and bad sides with a lot of things. On the good side, again, on the good side, you could say, great, these tools that became nothing more than political tools have lost their power. On the other side, you could say, well, those words used to actually have a meaning, but that meaning has now been lost. And so where do we go from here? I don't know. Anyways, folks, that said, join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Let me know in the chat, what do you think? Do you agree with me, disagree with me? Do you think the solution to the ills of the world is to look at yourself and refine yourself? Do you think that there needs to be some outer force? I do believe you need to, if you're just solely focused on the internal, you might as well go live in a cave in the desert, okay? You need to engage with society still. I don't believe in extremes. I think the good old middle way is often the best. But to what extent should we try to change the outer world? I don't know. I wonder about it sometimes. What do you think? Let me know in the chat. And join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, please don't forget to like and share this video. It does help us a lot. That said, thank you all for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free.